is Remus Lupin, and you may or may not know that, I don't know. Someone suggested to me that I talk about my favorite books, and well, if you do know who I am, then you know that I do like books, and I would love to share some of it, but I've never done a book club before, and that's where the whole issue is, that I've never actually had to talk about the books that I like. So I'm gonna try to do as well as I can. And the books that I'd like to talk about this time are Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. I'm gonna say that completely wrong and I'm so sorry. And The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. And that's quite a title. So if we start with Slaughterhouse-Five, it is an anti-war novel about Billy, who is a soldier who has PTSD, I'd like to say, which is something you realize quite late in the novel, actually. Or I don't know, maybe people realized it before me, but I was just taken aback because Billy, the whole tale is fragmented as of him having become unstuck in time. He describes it himself, having been taken away by some aliens, and I think what's really interesting about it is that the way that it talks about him and his friends, the soldiers, and the time during war, because that it is not actually describing them in any heroic sort of matter. It's actually more ridiculing them, or talking about them and their sufferings and their deaths as unimportant and meaningless. I wouldn't say unimportant, but meaningless, because every time someone dies, it says "so goes," and it's the same phrase repeated over and over again, and every time someone dies it isn't really described as something grand or something important, it just says "so it goes." I think that was really powerful to read, in the sense that there was something lacking from how we usually read about war novels, and how people are heroic and they get long, very long descriptions and the heroic death, and they get everything, but here they get a "so it goes." I really liked it because maybe that's because I'm pretty anti-war, but I felt that that it really struck a punch with me. So yeah, I would recommend it if you're into anti-war novels, and also it is banned in American classrooms as far as I know, and that is an excellent reason to read it. And they say it's because of a description of a picture of a naked woman and a horse, but I do more so believe that it's perhaps the anti-war aspect of it. So, I mean, even if you don't agree with all the points made in the book and, you know, the view on life that there is, I do think that it is worth a read and worth some thoughts anyway. The next book I want to talk about is actually one of my very personal favorites, and that is The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. And I don't think that a lot of people have actually read it. I don't know. I don't know that it's very popular. It was recommended to me by a Scottish professor, and I really enjoyed it. It's just like Slaughterhouse-Five. It's complex narrative. Not in the sense that it jumps around in the story, because it doesn't, it's very linear in its progression, but in the sense that you are told the same story twice. And what I found really interesting about that was that, well, it is very highly unusual, but it's not the same story told by two people who both live through the story, because practically it's written by James Hogg in the middle of the 1800s. But it takes place in the 1700s, Scotland, at the time where there was Jacobites wanting to, I don't know if they wanted to be independent, please don't hang me up too much on this, but they supported another line of succession to the throne, that the one that was currently sitting on it in England. And I think it was also somewhat about religion and politics, so there's that. That's a whole other area, but it's written by James Hogg, who himself he described himself as a Tory, but He came from a Jacobite background. He was basically a shepherd. He became an author. He didn't really have any schooling as far as I know, but he was taken in by all these famous Scottish authors and brought to Edinburgh. And it was this clash in his life and the conflicts within him that sort of, I think, inspired the novel, because it was published as having been found by a dead body, the main character in the story, having found his memoirs, and then this fictional editor that James Hogg made up had then written his own true story, like the truth about what really happened, not what Robert, the person who wrote the memoirs and committed suicide, wrote happened. Because the clash is that it's about two brothers, where one is very loved by his father. He is very modern. He grew up with his father. He grew up wealthy. He grew up popular. He grew up very social, very loved. And the other one grew up with his mother and a reverend. And he grew up very religiously, and he didn't really have any friends. And he was quite mean to begin with, always wearing dark clothes. So it's about Robert, the guy that grew up less fortunately, I'd say. It's about him and his struggles with Christianity, because he did grow up very, very strictly religious, and he became one of the elect. He is a Presbyterian. And I don't know a whole lot about the religion, but as far as I know, him being part of the electoral elect, he himself viewed it as now he could do nothing wrong, and he was chosen by God, and he was doing everything for God. And the same day that he's told by his adoptive father, the Reverend, that he is electoral elect, he meets this other young man, his name's Jill Martin, and he has supernatural powers. He can change his appearance like a chameleon. He's very mysterious. He knows a lot of things. And Robert just thinks he's great because he says that Jill Martin says that he's very Christian, but he never wants to pray with Robert. So, Robert just thinks that he is so Christian that he will pray on his own, and it's a very private matter to him, and he's just taken by him. And he does everything Jill Martin tells him to do, and it very early becomes quite evident that Jill Martin is the devil himself in person in the novel. So, Robert does everything he says because Robert is an elect, and he tries to, every time he tries to justify to himself the actions that he's doing and the actions that Jill Martin is doing. And in that sense, it's about how religion can blind you, and, you know, quite literally, the devil just has to say a few simple things and then he's lured into killing people. So in that sense, I think it's about bigotry and how you can be easily blinded by your own ideals. But in the same sense, I think it's also quite critical of the editor, who is representative of the more modern part of Scottish society, because there was this tear when the rural and the people living in Edinburgh and such were quite a lot more modern and scientifically inclined to science and much less religious. So there's this clash, and that's represented through that we see first the editor's rendering of the novel and the rendering of the events. That is, it doesn't even focus on Robert, it focuses on George, his brother, who is a lot more like what the editor would like in a person, because they seem to share a lot of things in common. And the editor's rendering of Robert's memoirs is all about him trying to explain how Robert didn't actually live through the things that he lived through. So in the same sense that it's quite critical of Robert and how he is blinded by his belief, it is also quite critical of being blinded by your belief in other things than religion, and in this case science and the more modern approach and worldview. So I really liked it. I think that it is a bit strange because it is the same tale told 2 times, and yet it doesn't really seem like the same tale because the editor seems to just sort of make things up. But the thing what's interesting is that it was published as a literary hoax, and why would James Hogg publish a novel as a fake editor who's written his own version of memoirs that he has gotten to by grave digging and stealing them from a mummified corpse from 100 years ago? So why would he do that? And I think it comes down to, and I know I talk a lot about this, but it's I really like this book. What I think it comes down to is that it's a clash between the worldviews that James Hogg himself came to represent, because in one sense he became an author, he was part of the literary elite in Edinburgh, but in another sense he was ridiculed by his fellow writers as the shepherd, the Ettrick shepherd. I think they made fun of him. And sort of, they had a satirical character that they called that, and that was naive, and he was, he was downright stupid. And it was after that they made fun of him like that he posted this. And what it appears to me to be is that it's sort of a critique of being fanatic, and that how it can blind you to be too set in your worldview, how you can be incapable of actually realizing what's going on in front of you, because you are so set in stone in what you think and what you do, and how that can actually make you stupid. And that is either, as Robert is being in the novel, by being so obsessed with his religion, or how sure they are to try to find a scientific explanation for how the editor is trying to alter the story in order for it to fit with his worldview, rather than being open to try to challenge his worldview. I don't know, I'm not gonna say that I agree with everything that I think James Hogg is putting forward, but I do find it very interesting, and I think that there are important lessons to be learned through the novel if one wants to. So I think we can all be too set in our own worldviews and forget to consider those around us. I thought it was very good. I would most definitely recommend The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. And I'm sorry for not actually having it on me like Slaughterhouse-Five, but the next books I'll try to have on me, and that is, I figured I'd definitely read The Uncensored Picture of Dorian Gray. I think that's what it called, Uncensored or Unaltered, which is the original picture of Dorian Gray before it was altered, because Oscar Wilde's publisher edited it quite heavily in order to fit into Victorian ideals and society, and in order for it to be readable by the general public. So I figured I'd read the unedited version because I'd like to read what he really wanted to tell us. So I'm gonna read that one, but if you want to read the other one, or if it's too hard to get, I just read the regular one, and then perhaps we could talk about how they are different. I'd also love to hear if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts about them are in the comments below, or if you're like planning on reading them, or what you think that you're gonna think of them. And also I think I might read Lolita by Nabokov. I don't know if I said that right. I've heard a lot about it, but I've never actually read it. I think it's one of those that are very, very famous, but somehow I never get around to read it. But then I figured I'd read it now, even though I figure it's going to be a bit challenging because I know what the general topic is about, and it's special, right? So I guess we'll see how it goes. So thank you for this time. I thought it was very cozy, and I'm sorry for my mumbling and incoherent sentences, but I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I hope you're gonna like the books if you read them. And otherwise, I'd very much like to read what you would suggest that I read down in the comments below. Maybe I read it already, but then I'd like to talk about it. I'd like to hear what you guys think are good books. So I've been rambling on for too long, and my tea's cold. So thank you for listening, tuning in. I really hope you like it. If you do, and if a lot of people seem to have interest, I might make another one, but nothing is for sure yet, because if I'm just rambling to myself, maybe I should just ramble to myself. But I really hope you liked it, and yeah, bye. My tea's getting cold.